The last stage out of Harlow Crossing left without her. Ivy knew it the moment she stepped out of the mercantile and saw the empty stretch of road where the coach had been. The wheel ruts were still fresh in the mud. The horses had been there not 10 minutes ago. She had asked Mr. Pettigrew to hold it. She had asked him twice. The cold hit her before the understanding did. Not the cold of the air, though that was real enough, a late October bite that had teeth, but the cold of knowing there was nothing left. No stage, no money for another ticket, no one in this town who owed her anything or would claim her if she asked. She stood on the boardwalk with her travel bag at her feet and watched the road until there was nothing to watch. Harlow Crossing was not a town that stayed open after dark. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, the general store had its shutters drawn. The land office was already dark. The woman at the boarding house, Mrs. Carver, with her flat eyes and her mouth like a seam, had made it plain that morning, pay by noon or clear out. Ivy had cleared out. She had $3.40 left in the world, and the nearest town was 42 miles east by road, longer by foot, and the first snow of the season was moving in from the northwest. She could smell it, that particular blank smell, like iron and silence. She picked up her bag and started walking anyway, because standing still felt worse. She made it as far as the livery before she stopped. A man was hitching a mule team to a supply wagon. 2 big animals, dark brown, their breath making clouds in the cooling air. The wagon was loaded heavy, crates and burlap sacks lashed down with rope. He was working the second harness when he noticed her standing at the edge of the road, and he didn't stop working. He just looked at her the way a man looks at weather, noting it, reading it, deciding what it means. He was large. That was the first thing. Not tall in the loose way of men who've grown too fast, but solid, the kind of large that comes from years of actual work. His coat was open despite the cold. His hands on the leather straps were steady and certain. He looked at her bag. He looked at the empty road east. He didn't say anything. "I missed the stage," she said, because the silence had weight to it, and she felt the need to account for herself. He nodded once, like she'd told him something he already suspected. "Is there another one through tomorrow?" "No." He moved to check the hitch on the near mule, running his hand along the collar. "Once a week. Tuesdays." Today was Tuesday. She looked at the road again. "How far is the next town east?" 42 miles. "On foot?" He glanced at the sky. She didn't need him to answer that. The clouds moving over the ridge were the color of pewter, low and serious. 42 miles on foot in those clouds was not a plan. It was a way to not survive the week. "I'm heading up to my place," the man said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He was checking the other side of the hitch now, his back half turned. "It's not east. It's up the switchback, north face of the ridge, about 6 miles. She waited. "There's a room," he said. "It was my sister's, before she moved down to the valley. Got a good lock on the door." The way he said it, the last part especially, was not a reassurance he offered easily. It cost him something to say it. She could tell. He was not a man who explained himself often. She looked at him. The steadiness of his hands. The fact that he hadn't stopped working while he spoke, hadn't turned to face her with that particular kind of male attention that made her feel like something being appraised. She thought about the road east. She thought about the smell of that coming snow. "What's your name?" she asked. "Croy." She picked up her bag. He didn't talk on the way up. She'd expected that to feel threatening, or at the very least uncomfortable. A strange woman in a wagon, with a man she'd met 12 minutes ago, heading up a mountain switchback in the dark. Her mother would have had things to say about that. Her mother was 3 years dead and in the ground in Ohio, and Ivy was 26 and had learned that the world rarely offered you the situations your mother had prepared you for. The mules knew the road. She could tell by the way they moved. No hesitation at the switchbacks. Even in the failing light, Croy let them set their own pace. He held the reins loosely, not fighting them, just present. At the second switchback, he stopped the team, climbed down, and disappeared around the back of the wagon. She heard him moving things. When he came back around, he handed her a folded wool blanket without comment and climbed back up. She put it around her shoulders. It smelled like cedar and something else she couldn't name. Not unpleasant. The snow started before they reached the top. Not heavy yet. Just the first dry flakes, the kind that come ahead of the real thing as a warning. The pines closed in on either side of the track and the dark deepened. She watched the trees and told herself she was not afraid, and it was mostly true. The cabin sat at the end of a cleared yard, backed against a granite outcropping that must have blocked the north wind in winter. Solid construction. Notched logs, not rough-cut lumber. A real stone chimney, wood stacked high along the east wall, already laid in for winter by someone who knew what winter looked like up here. Croy pulled the wagon around to the barn before he did anything else. She noticed that. He didn't hand her down and rush to get inside out of the cold. He drove the team into the barn, unhitched both mules, rubbed them down. She could hear him in there, moving deliberately, talking low to the animals, and he hung the harnesses on their proper hooks and made sure they had water and hay before he came back out and closed the barn doors. It took 20 minutes. She stood in the yard with the snowflakes coming down and waited, and when he came out, she didn't comment on it, but she'd registered it. A man who tends his animals before himself tends to most things the same way. He unlocked the cabin door and held it. Inside was dim and very cold. She stood just inside the threshold while he moved around in the dark, striking a match, touching it to the lamp wick. The light came up slowly and showed her a single large room, rough but ordered, everything in its place, nothing wasted. A wood stove in the corner, a table, 2 chairs, a set of shelves with dry goods, a ladder leading to a loft. To the left, a narrow door. He crossed to the wood stove and crouched in front of it, building the fire from scratch. She watched him layer the kindling, watched the first flame catch and take hold. "The room's through there," he said, without turning around. "My sister left some things. There should be a quilt on the bed." Ivy set her bag down by the door. "Thank you," she said. "For the ride?" He didn't answer. He was adjusting the damper now, watching the fire through the grate. She crossed to the narrow door and opened it. A small room, barely wider than the bed itself. A window facing east, dark now. A quilt folded at the foot of the mattress, blue and white, carefully made. A hook on the back of the door. A small rag rug on the floor. She set her bag on the bed. She stood in that room and felt, for the first time in 2 weeks, that she was not about to fall. She didn't sleep right away. She lay in the dark and listened to the snow coming against the window glass, and she thought about how she'd ended up in Harlow Crossing in the first place. It was a short list with a long tail, the job in Ridgecrest, that turned out not to be what they'd described in the letter. The money she'd spent getting there, the decision to go north rather than back east, because going back east meant admitting she'd been wrong, and she was 26 years old and had been wrong about enough. Things already, the stage she'd booked, the errand that had taken 7 minutes too long. 7 minutes. She listened to the wind pick up outside and thought about the road east and the smell of that sky. On the other side of the wall, she could hear him moving. The scrape of a chair, the sound of something being set on the stove. Then, quiet. He wasn't a restless man. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire and the snow. When she woke, it was still dark, but a different kind of dark. The blue-grey dark just ahead of dawn. The window was frosted at the corners. She could see her breath. She dressed quickly, which was easy because she'd slept in most of it, and opened the door. The fire in the stove had been banked but not out. He was already up. She could see through the window that the barn door was open, a lamp burning inside. She stood at the stove and held her hands near the iron until they stopped aching. There was a pot on the stove, coffee already made, still warm. She found a cup on the shelf and filled it, and then felt strange about having done so without asking, and then decided that the pot had been left there. For a reason. The coffee was strong and slightly bitter, and very good. She was still standing at the window with her cup when he came back in from the barn. Stomping snow off his boots at the threshold, he looked at the cup in her hands and said nothing. He crossed to the stove and poured his own cup and stood at the other end of the room, drinking it. "How much snow?" she asked. 8 inches. Still coming. She looked at the road she couldn't see. "Is the switchback passable?" "Not today." She turned that over. "Tomorrow?" He looked at the window. "We'll see." She had expected to feel panicked by that, or at least unsettled. Instead, she felt something that took her a moment to identify: the absence of urgency. She had nowhere she was supposed to be. There was nothing she was late for. For the first time in months, the next hour was simply the next hour. "Can I help with something?" she asked. "I don't know much about livestock, but I can follow directions." He looked at her over the rim of his cup, assessing, not unkind. "Wood needs splitting," he said. "Pile by the east wall's getting low." She'd never split wood in her life. She didn't mention that. He showed her once, without commentary, where to put her feet, how to let the weight of them all do the work, where to aim on the round. Then he went back to whatever he was doing in the barn, and left her to it. She was bad at it at first. She sent them all glancing off the top of the first round, and nearly took off her own knee. She tried, again and again. On the 4th swing she found the angle, and the log split clean, and she felt a satisfaction that was out of all proportion to the achievement, and she kept going. By mid-morning her arms ached from the shoulder to the wrist, and she'd added considerably to the stack, and she had stopped thinking about Ridgecrest or the stage or the East Road, or any of it. There was only the wood and the cold air, and the particular animal focus of physical work that her body had apparently been hungry for. She didn't hear him behind her, until he said, "That's enough." She turned. He was standing at the edge of the stack, looking at what she'd added. His expression didn't change much, but something shifted in it. "Come inside," he said. "I'll put something on." He made a soup. Dried salt pork, beans he'd had soaking since the night before, wild onion, something she couldn't identify that turned out to be dried mushroom. He did it with the same economy he brought to everything. No wasted movement, no unnecessary heat, each thing done in the right order. She sat at the table and watched him, and found herself thinking about the men she'd known who treated a kitchen like something that needed to be fought. The soup was real, thick and deeply savory, the kind of food that doesn't apologize for being plain. She ate 2 bowls. He ate 1, and didn't comment on the 2. The snow kept coming through the afternoon. She found a book on the shelf, a survey of North American geology, probably not chosen for entertainment, and read it at the table while the light shifted behind the clouds outside. He worked at the other end of the room, mending a piece of harness leather, unhurried, hands moving with the needle in the way, of a man who has done this specific thing 1,000 times. They didn't talk much. She had expected that to become strange after the first few hours. It didn't. At one point, she looked up and found him watching her. Not in a way that made her want to move, but in the way a person looks at something they're still deciding what to make of. He looked back at his work without embarrassment, and she looked back at her book, and neither of them mentioned it. That night she lay awake longer, not from fear, from something else that she didn't have a clean name for yet. She thought about the story she would tell, later, if she ever had occasion to tell it. "I missed a stage in a nowhere town, and a stranger took me up the mountain, and I split half a cord of wood, and ate the best soup I've had in 2 years. It sounded like nothing. It sounded like a thing that could easily have gone wrong. She kept turning over the details that told her it hadn't and wouldn't, the way he'd tended the mules before coming inside. The lock on her door, mentioned once, not mentioned again. The coffee left ready on the stove. A man who does what he says he'll do and doesn't ask you to thank him for it. She'd met enough of the other kind to know how to read the difference. By the third day the snow had stopped, and the sky turned hard and pale blue, and the switchback was half cleared, frozen, but passable. He told her at breakfast. Roads should be open by afternoon. She nodded. She looked at her coffee cup. He looked at his. There's a mail run that comes through Harlow on Fridays, he said. Driver goes east, then doubles back through Clearwater. He'd take a fare. Friday was 3 days from now. I could probably use the help, he said. If you wanted to stay till then, there's a lot of work before first hard freeze. The shed roof needs patching before it takes more snow weight. He was looking out the window when he said it, not at her. His jaw was set in the way of a man who has said a careful thing and is prepared for the answer to be no. She thought about Clearwater. She thought about the shed roof and the wood she hadn't quite finished. Splitting. She thought about a soup that deserved to be eaten again. I don't know anything about patching a shed roof, she said. I know, he said. I'd show you. She looked at his profile, the weathered patience of a man who lived alone and had gotten good at it. Not because he preferred it, but because the mountain didn't ask you whether you preferred things, it just asked whether you could manage. All right, she said. He turned to look at her then, not with surprise, but with something that was almost relief, if relief could be a quiet thing. He turned back to his coffee. We'll start after breakfast, he said. Outside, the snow on the yard caught the morning light and turned it into something that almost looked warm.